9,400,000 square kilometers. A geological monster the size of the United States known as the Sahara Desert acts as a heat engine consuming the surrounding landscape. Why does a simple hole in the ground succeed where billions of dollars in high-tech infrastructure have failed? The question seems paradoxical given the scale of the crisis. But while governments engage in endless debate, millions of people are fighting back with their own hands, utilizing strange half-moon-shaped pits dug into the unyielding earth. One can notice how these pits are carved with manual tools into the sun-scorched surface. We are observing the Sahel region, a semi-arid belt stretching across more than 20 African countries where the lives of hundreds of millions of people hang by a thread. At first glance, the land appears to be 4 to 6 meters is the precise diameter of the hydraulic traps carved into the lunar-like landscape. Why must millions of farmers labor under a suffocating heat to sculpt the earth with only hand tools like shovels and pickaxes? One might assume they are digging simple drainage lines, but the reality is a calculated hydraulic strategy involving precise arcs positioned against the natural slope of the terrain. This crescent shape serves as a perfect mechanical interceptor for liquid energy. When seasonal rainwater rushes down the hillside with the force of an out-of-control train, these crescent structures block the path of the flow. The specific curvature forces the descending water to decelerate, spread its volume across the surface, and ultimately come to a complete standstill. It functions as an emergency braking system constructed entirely from compacted earth. The technical specifications for these basins are remarkably rigorous. While the diameter is substantial, the depth remains surprisingly shallow at only 20 to 40 centimeters. One can notice that the objective is not to create a deep pool, but rather a wide, shallow basin that provides enough time for physics to take effect. This design allows gravity to pull the water into the deep subsoil, effectively hiding it from the theft of the overhead sun. But this is just the beginning. A single human being, utilizing only physical determination, can excavate one of these earthen structures in exactly 1 hour. It is a zero-cost technology with infinite scalability, where the subsequent transformation appears to be magic, but remains grounded in pure science. Field studies conducted in Niger and Burkina Faso demonstrate a transformation that challenges conventional logic. Areas that previously maintained 0% vegetation, lands classified as dead and sterile, recover 40 to 60% of their green cover in a period of only 2 to 5 years. It only looks obvious to see dust, but where red earth and despair once dominated, islands of green and native shrubs now emerge. Eventually, trees return to the landscape on their own, sustained by soil that has learned how to absorb moisture once again. The process is only gaining momentum. In the merciless heat of the African continent, capturing water is merely the initial phase of the operation. The next engineering challenge involves protecting the resource from the region's primary predator, which is evaporation. In a standard open water reservoir, the African sun can extract up to 90% of the total accumulated volume through thermal radiation. This represents an unbearable tax on local survival. To bypass this physical limitation, local engineers in Kenya have inverted traditional logic through the implementation of sand dams. They construct massive walls of concrete or stone directly across the beds of seasonal rivers. At first glance, it seems simple to build a barrier. But unlike a conventional dam that holds back a blue lake, these structures are specifically designed to trap heavy sediment. As seasonal floods transport minerals and debris, sand accumulates behind the wall to create a massive artificial beach. The genius of the system lies in the fact that water hides within the void spaces between the individual grains of sand. It acts as a pressurized underground vault. The sand layer protects the water from the scorching sun, reducing evaporation rates to nearly zero while simultaneously filtering the liquid naturally through the mineral layers. A single sand dam can store millions of liters of water that remain accessible throughout the entire year via simple wells. The equipment gradually reaches the supply, even when the surface of the river appears dry and dusty. Everything only gets more complicated as communities adapt to these new systems. In regions where this technique was adopted, the total availability of water tripled almost immediately. The yields of vital agricultural crops, such as corn and millet, skyrocketed between 50 and 100%. These systems work in tandem with stone lines, which are simple rows of rocks that function as speed bumps for rainwater across agricultural fields. It is visible how these humble structures prove that there is no need to reinvent the wheel. Engineers only need to understand the fundamental mechanics of the earth. These invisible structures have become the backbone of a major agricultural revolution, converting environmental despair into abundant harvests. Transition to the next level. While Africa struggles to capture the falling rain, on the opposite side of the globe, China conducts a war against a different enemy in the form of a solid moving ocean. The narrative moves now to the Taklamakan Desert, where the scale of intervention reaches a new industrial peak. 100 millimeters of precipitation per year is the maximum moisture this environment receives, earning it a name that translates to the place where those who enter never leave. Conditions here mirror those of another planet rather than a terrestrial landscape. To visualize this extreme aridity, one must imagine pouring a single half-liter bottle of water onto 1 square meter of earth and expecting that moisture to survive an entire week under a relentless sun. This territory is 10 times drier than the deserts of California, but the primary danger is not merely the lack of water, it is the constant mobility of the terrain. One can notice how the sand dunes do not remain stationary. They move across the horizon, consuming roads, entire cities, and the traces of human history. Why must an industrial machine of this scale be mobilized against shifting sand? It seems like a battle against nature itself that cannot be won. But without stabilizing the desert, the environmental collapse would continue to expand into the heart of the country, threatening the very survival of its urban centers. During the decade of the 1990s, the situation reached a critical threshold when the capital, Beijing, located thousands of kilometers away, began to suffocate under intense sandstorms for more than 80 days per year. The sky frequently turned a deep orange, and the air became physically unbreathable for millions of citizens. China responded by mobilizing the largest industrial and labor force in the world for the most ambitious ecological project in human history. This is the 3 North Shelter Forest Program, colloquially known as the Great Green Wall of China. The technical objective is to plant 35 million hectares of forest by the year 2050, effectively creating a living shield stretching 4,500 kilometers. But this is just the beginning. How can a forest be planted in a sea of sand that refuses to stay still? It only looks obvious to plant trees, but in reality, a foundation must be built on a surface that flows with the properties of water. The engineering solution is a complex mixture of massive physical force and high-precision aerodynamics. The process is only gaining momentum as engineers map the chaotic movement of the dunes using a network of satellites and specialized drones. From this data, they designed a geometric battle plan known as the straw checkerboard. The technical requirement is to cover the desert surface with an infinite grid of straw squares, each measuring approximately 20 by 20 feet. The logistical scale of this operation is immense. Millions of tons of straw are transported into the heart of a void where established roads do not exist. One can notice how heavy trucks frequently sink up to their axles in the soft, unstable sand. It gets more complex further on. Because heavy machinery cannot operate on the steep and treacherous slopes of the shifting dunes, the primary labor is performed by a massive army of workers. Under temperatures that often exceed 49 degrees Celsius, these teams advance across the sand. They use only their hands and manual spades to anchor the material into the earth. They lay the straw in perfectly straight lines and bury the center of each bundle deep into the sand, leaving the sharp ends standing upright. The resulting visual is surreal as the golden desert transforms into a gigantic checkerboard extending toward the horizon. At first glance, this might appear to be a form of landscape art, but in reality, it is a system of pure aerodynamics. The standing straw creates physical friction against the moving wind. It successfully lifts the boundary layer of the airflow, which reduces the wind speed significantly near the ground level. Where the wind previously dragged sand across the surface to bury everything in its path, the sand now remains stationary. The material is ready to move to the next processing phase without haste. Millions of straw grids cover the landscape to immobilize the shifting dunes. This geometric structure acts as a cage made of dry grass, designed to domesticate a geological beast. Why is this grid pattern established across the desert floor? It only looks obvious to the eye as a barrier, but in reality, once the sand is trapped within this prison, a complex life support phase begins. The checkerboard is not the final objective, but rather a nursery for an emerging ecosystem. This is just the beginning. Mechanical drills pierce the center of every individual cell among the millions of squares. Chinese machinery and human hands work in unison to introduce biological life into the arid environment. Seedlings of extremophile species such as the saxaul and the red willow are planted into the openings. One can notice how these are not common plants, but evolutionary survivors specifically adapted to this terrestrial inferno. The equipment gradually positions each seedling with millimeter precision. It seems simple to plant a tree, but in reality, the roots must be buried deeply where the sand still retains a faint trace of moisture and coolness. The straw, currently serving as a shield against the abrasive force of the wind, performs a final act of technical sacrifice. Over a calculated period, the dry grass begins to rot. As it decomposes, the material transforms into a layer of organic matter, acting as a natural fertilizer that feeds the roots of the young trees. Everything only gets more complicated as the biological cycle takes over. Roots of the maturing trees descend several meters into the depths, gripping the internal structure of the dune from within. This physical anchoring transforms the mobile sand into stable soil. One can notice the drastic change in the environmental data of the region. The forest coverage of China, which stood at a mere 10% in 1949, has surged to over 25%. Where once there was only the silence of death and the roar of the wind, the rustle of leaves is now audible. Africa and China demonstrate two distinct technical paths toward the same environmental destination. In Africa, the victory is achieved through adaptation, utilizing the aerodynamic shape of a crescent moon to invite water to remain in the soil. In China, the victory is secured through conquest, employing a rigid grid to force the sand into obedience. But in both cases, the industrial and biological lesson remains powerful. The process is only gaining momentum. We do not require science fiction technologies to restore the planetary balance. The camera glides along the vast green belts that prove we must understand elemental forces like gravity, wind, and water to work alongside them. Whether using a rusted shovel in the Sahel or managing a massive logistics operation in the Taklamakan, humanity demonstrates the capacity to heal the scars of the Earth. At first glance, the desert appears eternal, but in reality, the yellow stain on satellite imagery is receding before the advancing green. One can notice how the greatest tool available is the collective will to persist rather than the machine itself. The desert may be vast, but the data proves it is not invincible. 150 tons of soil and vegetation now stand where there was once only dust. This marks the transition from mechanical intervention to a self-sustaining natural cycle. The material is ready to move to the next processing phase without haste. Thus ends one of the key stages of global land restoration. 100 days of scorching sun and the brutal force of harvesting machines weighing dozens of tons are what this fragile fruit must survive to reach its destination. Why does a product that begins as a seed smaller than the head of a pin require such industrial intensity? At first glance, the process seems like simple farming, but in reality, it is a high-stakes engineering feat to transform millions of delicate fruits into a global food supply without crushing a single one in the process. The battle for a record-breaking harvest does not begin with the seed itself, but with the precise engineering of the earth. Giant tractors equipped with reinforced steel plows tear through the compacted ground under the pale light of dawn. The equipment gradually turns over thousands of pounds of earth to allow oxygen to penetrate deep into the substrate. One can notice how the steel blades rotate and slice, creating a porous environment where roots can breathe freely. But this is just the beginning. Why is the soil treated with the same intensity as a patient in an emergency room? The earth may look uniform, but its chemical balance is the primary factor in fruit survival. Technical sensors analyze the composition of the dirt to determine exactly which nutrients are missing before a single sprout breaks the surface. Science enters the field where raw mechanical power leaves off. Heavy machinery moves at a constant speed of 5 kilometers per hour to ensure the soil is pulverized into a specific grain size. It is visible how the heavy clods of earth are broken down into a fine, workable medium. Everything only gets more complicated as the planting phase approaches. The journey of the red gold starts in these deep furrows. where the ground is prepared to protect the future crop from the elements. This meticulous preparation of the terrain concludes the initial phase of the cultivation cycle. Thus, the foundation is laid for the growth process to begin under controlled conditions. 100% precision is required to determine the exact level of nutrients within the soil before any planting can begin. Why is this chemical analysis performed with such obsessive detail? It would seem that standard soil would suffice for any hardy crop. But if even a single mineral is missing from the profile, the entire harvest fails before the first sprout appears. Organic compost or decomposed manure is integrated into the earth with surgical accuracy to form a base that is both soft and fertile. But this is just the beginning. The earth is then sculpted into a specific architectural form. Leveling machines move across the landscape to create long geometric ridges that extend in perfect lines toward the horizon. In modern agricultural operations, the process is even more technological. One can notice how drip irrigation lines are buried deep within these soil ridges, functioning like an invisible circulatory system. It gets more complex further on. This layout ensures that every single drop of water is delivered directly to the root zone without a millisecond of waste. It is a colossal infrastructure built specifically to support the millions of plant lives that are about to be born. One can notice a shocking contrast of scale as the most unlikely protagonist enters this prepared landscape: the seed. High genetic seeds are selected by farmers, appearing as tiny golden grains that literally disappear when placed on the tip of a human finger. It is difficult to believe that something so microscopically small carries the complex biological code required to feed entire cities. These seeds are never distributed at random or scattered by hand across the open field. Instead, they are sown into specialized trays within greenhouses that function as high-tech biological fortresses. Inside these structures, the temperature and humidity are monitored with military rigor. The equipment gradually maintains a perfect incubator environment where life explodes in only 1 week. Small green shoots emerge from the soil, appearing fragile and vulnerable to the touch. But they do not remain in this protected state forever. When the plants reach a height of between 15 and 20 centimeters and develop robust, thick stems, the critical moment of the transplant arrives. At first glance, moving a plant seems simple, but in reality, this is a high-risk operation. Work begins early in the morning to prevent the seedlings from experiencing the thermal shock of the midday heat. Armies of workers or automated transplanting machines move the young plants into the open fields with steady movements. Precision is vital during every second of the transfer. The plants are positioned with an exact spacing of exactly half a meter between each one. The process is only gaining momentum. If the seedlings are placed too close together, they will compete for limited resources and eventually die. If they are positioned too far apart, valuable irrigated space is wasted. As soon as the roots touch the real soil of the field, the first irrigation cycle is activated. This liquid contact seals the biological pact between the plant and the open field. The water flows through the hidden lines, and the transition to the next level of growth is finalized without haste. 21 days of intensive biological development begin as the agricultural field transforms into a complex organism requiring uninterrupted observation. Growth is never an autonomous process, as the tomato plant must be meticulously guided through its entire life cycle by human and machine intervention. One can notice how moisture sensors buried deep within the soil profile transmit data in real time to centralized computers managing the automated irrigation infrastructure. Why is this hydraulic precision considered a matter of life or? Tens of tons of tomatoes are processed every single hour by industrial harvesters that dominate the landscape. Why is such mechanical power necessary for mass production? In the manual sector, workers handle each fruit gently to avoid damaging the skin. But for the manufacturing of sauces and ketchup, high-capacity metal machines replace manual delicacy with raw speed. These industrial combines move steadily across the lines, engulfing the entire plant or utilizing high-frequency mechanical agitators. The equipment vibrates the vines at a specific resonance that causes only the ripe fruit to detach and fall onto the moving conveyor belts. One can notice how the green plants remain rooted while the red harvest flows toward the storage bins. It is a demonstration of force bruta controlled by precise engineering. But this is just the beginning. Once the harvest is complete, the tomatoes are immediately covered to shield them from direct sunlight. It only looks obvious that they require protection, but in reality, internal heat is a critical enemy that can turn the fruit into mush before it reaches the gates. Trucks loaded with 30 tons of red gold accelerate along the highways with urgency. They possess only a few hours of transit time before the organic cargo begins its inevitable degradation. The factory cannot tolerate delays. At the processing plant, the organic chaos of the field meets the cold, structured order of stainless steel. One can notice the trucks tilting their trailers to discharge the cargo into channels of rushing water. From this exact moment, the human hand no longer touches the product. Automated machines assume total control of the trajectory. The first phase involves a high-pressure washing system. Powerful water jets and rotating brushes strip away the remnants of the field, including soil, stones, and organic debris. What emerges from this washing tunnel is a brilliant river of red spheres. The process is only gaining momentum. Why is optical scanning superior to the human eye in this environment? High-speed lasers analyze every individual tomato as it travels across the belt. They detect imperfections that are invisible to the naked eye, such as internal bruising or minute green spots. The system triggers a pulse of compressed air with millisecond precision. The defective fruit is ejected from the line like a projectile, ensuring only the elite specimens continue forward. Waste is practically eliminated in this cycle. The rejected material is redirected for use in animal feed or organic fertilizer. The surviving tomatoes are now clean, inspected, and prepared for the final transformation. Everything only gets more complicated as the fruit moves toward the removal of its skin. Efficiency at this scale is brutally calculated. The tomatoes enter a specialized chamber filled with high-pressure steam. It is a technical environment where the thermal shock will soon separate the peel from the pulp. The material is ready to move to the next processing phase without haste. 100 degrees Celsius is the boiling point that triggers the violent transformation of the tomato's exterior. Why must the moisture trapped directly beneath the skin be heated so aggressively? It only looks obvious to apply heat, but in reality, the sudden thermal expansion causes the surface to rupture in a fraction of a second. One can notice how the skin literally explodes and detaches from the internal pulp under the pressure of the expanding steam. The equipment gradually moves the fruit towards soft rubber rollers or high-pressure air jets. These mechanical systems strip away the loosened peels, leaving behind nothing but the bare red flesh of the vegetable. But this is just the beginning. The process is only gaining momentum as the production line moves toward the total destruction of the original form. Industrial crushers strike the tomatoes with immense force, pulverizing the pulp into a raw mass. One can notice how the material is then forced through fine mesh sieves with calculated pressure to isolate the seeds and tough fibers from the liquid. Everything only gets more complicated during the extraction of the aromatic essence. The result of the filtration is a thick, rich liquid that flows toward the cooking stations. For the production of tomato concentrate, the factory utilizes vacuum evaporation chambers. Why is a vacuum necessary during the boiling phase? Processing the pulp in a low-pressure environment allows the water to evaporate at lower temperatures, which prevents the product from burning or losing its nutritional profile. The camera glides along the sealed tanks, where the juice transforms into a dense, heavy paste. A massive concentration of processed essence fills the air, signaling the completion of the refinement stage. At first glance, the product is now perfect, but in reality, it remains highly vulnerable to the surrounding environment. Oxygen and bacteria are the primary enemies that can compromise the entire batch in a matter of minutes. The race for preservation begins immediately as the hot sauce or paste flows through sterile stainless steel, piping toward the filling department. The equipment operates with a rhythmic and hypnotic cadence. It is visible how robotic arms and high-precision nozzles dispense the product into hundreds of metal cans, glass jars, or flexible sachets every 60 seconds. The velocity of the filling line is so extreme that the human eye can barely track the metallic shapes as they flicker past the sensors. Sealing happens hermetically in the instant following the filling process. This is the specific moment when time effectively stops for the product. By closing the container, the industry captures the flavor and freshness within a vacuum, protecting the contents from the outside world for several years. The metal cans then enter long cooling tunnels where water sprays gradually lower the internal temperature to a stable state. The material is ready to move to the next processing phase without haste. 15 Great Pyramids of Giza would fail to contain the volume of toxic black sludge described here if they were filled to the very top. Why has the world seen such a massive accumulation of waste over the last decade? In that 10-year span, 198 million pounds of oil have been spilled into the global oceans. It is visible how the surface of the water turns into a thick, suffocating film that destroys entire ecosystems. It seems simple to assume that modern technology can prevent such disasters, but in reality, our multi-billion-dollar systems have repeatedly failed. The process of environmental destruction is only gaining momentum. One can notice how the MT Solar One tanker navigates the Philippine waters on August 11, 2006. It was carrying a deadly cargo for the Petron Corporation. Because of its advanced age and excessive weight, the steel giant could no longer withstand the pressure. The vessel succumbed and plunged 3,000 feet into the absolute darkness of the ocean floor. The impact was devastating, releasing 550,000 gallons of heavy bunker oil into the environment. This is not gasoline, but a much denser and more dangerous substance. Everything only gets more complicated when the limitations of human engineering are exposed. The salvation did not come from futuristic robots or high-end sensors. Surprisingly, the solution was found in the very waste we discard every day. Human hair and coconut husks proved more effective than modern engineering at capturing the oil. But this is just the beginning of the industrial story. Before the crisis reached its peak, products were being labeled with their identity, batch numbers, and production dates. The camera glides along the automated lines where palletizing robots stack boxes into perfect towers, preparing them for immediate dispatch. Forklifts load distribution trucks as they prepare to depart the facility. It only looks obvious that this is a simple logistical step, but one should pause to observe the scale of this megastructure. Thousands of tons of steel, laser sensors, and giant tractors exist solely to serve a single small fruit. This fruit began its life smaller than a pinhead. One can notice the precision as millions of cans now travel across oceans and vast road networks to reach household shelves. The process is only gaining momentum as the logistics chain spans the entire globe. When a can of tomato paste is opened for dinner, it represents more than just a simple ingredient. It is the physical result of a months-long battle against the natural elements and the absolute precision of modern engineering. Why is this level of technological density required for food? Without the patience of farmers and the integration of automated systems, such preservation would be impossible. Nature is effectively tamed and preserved through human ingenuity. This is the true power of industry. The material moves through the production chain, completing its transformation from the field to the final consumer. 840 backyard swimming pools filled to the brim with liquid tar is the volume required to visualize the scale of the disaster. This thick, viscous bunker oil functions as a heavy industrial poison designed for massive shipping vessels. The colossal spill transformed the ecosystem of Guimarães Island from a tropical paradise into a dark industrial graveyard. Why did the world-renowned white sand beaches and crystal-clear waters suddenly perish? The answer lies in the movement of a massive slick covering 3,700 acres of the marine environment. Mangrove forests that serve as the foundation for marine life were physically suffocated by the density of the substance. Coral reefs that required centuries of slow growth were converted into black stone in a matter of hours. This ecological destruction struck the center of the regional economy with absolute force. 20,000 fishermen found themselves without employment overnight as the local authorities implemented a total ban on fishing due to extreme pollution levels. Entire families lost their primary means of survival within a single day. One can notice how the economic ripple effect forced children to leave schools because the financial resources of their parents simply evaporated. The tourism sector, which previously generated billions of pesos, vanished as the shoreline became uninhabitable. At first glance, the national response followed the standard protocols of any modern technological power. But in reality, the sophisticated equipment faced a physical barrier it could not overcome. The government activated emergency procedures and deployed the highest-grade international technology available on the market. Floating containment booms were positioned in the water. Specialized vessels equipped with mechanical skimmers patrolled the coast. Industrial absorbents were distributed across the affected zones. This technological army appeared prepared for an environmental war, but the bunker oil resisted every mechanical intervention. But this is just the beginning. The density of the oil rendered Western machinery, designed for lighter petroleum products, into useless scrap metal. Bunker oil is so heavy that it does not merely float on the surface. It agglutinates into thick masses, adheres to rock formations, and penetrates deep into the sand layers. It flowed beneath the containment barriers as if they were not there. Furthermore, the geography of the marine reserve presented a logistical nightmare for engineers. Access was limited to narrow roads, incapable of supporting the weight of heavy industrial machinery. No American or European cleanup vessels were stationed nearby to provide immediate relief. Faced with a total technological defeat, the nation was forced to consider a strategy that seemed like a cruel joke to the international community. 3,700 acres of contaminated coastline had to be cleaned using manual labor and biological materials. When plastic and metal components failed to perform, the engineering focus shifted toward biological structures. The proposed solution was so unconventional that global observers remained skeptical. They decided to utilize human hair collected from thousands of barber shops across the country. A massive national mobilization started immediately. From Manila to Cebu, thousands of beauty salons ceased discarding hair waste. University students formed long queues to shave their heads and donate their fibers to the environmental cause. Why is human hair more effective than industrial polymers? The reason lies in pure physics rather than complex chemistry. Human hair possesses a unique surface structure covered in microscopic scales. It is a material that scientists classify as both oleophilic and hydrophobic. This means the biological fiber naturally attracts and binds with oil while simultaneously repelling water. One can notice how the oil sticks to the hair fibers, allowing for the manual extraction of the viscous poison from the sea. The process is only gaining momentum as the biological barriers are deployed. 10,000 kilograms of hair were woven into long mesh tubes to create handmade booms. These organic filters trap the bunker oil while allowing the seawater to pass through freely. From here, the transformation moves to the next phase of processing as the saturated hair is removed and replaced by fresh donations. Thus, the steel and plastic solutions were replaced by a biological network that finally began to restore the balance of the coastline. This phase of the cleanup demonstrates that even the most advanced industrial technology can be bypassed by the simple laws of physics and biology. The material is ready to move to the next processing phase without haste. 1.5 gallons of oil is the volume of liquid that can be absorbed by just 1 pound of human hair. Why does this organic fiber possess such a unique affinity for hydrocarbons while remaining completely indifferent to water? Unlike synthetic industrial sponges that swell up and become saturated with seawater, hair fibers ignore the liquid medium and focus exclusively on the black toxin. It only looks obvious that a material must be manufactured in a laboratory to be effective. The equipment gradually moves across the water as the hair floats on the surface, absorbing the toxic slick without interruption. One can notice how the material remains buoyant even as its weight increases from the trapped crude. The efficiency of this process is statistically significant. A practical experiment conducted during the Cosco Buzan disaster in San Francisco provided empirical proof of these capabilities. But this is just the beginning of the scale. 25,000 pounds of hair managed to suck up 170,000 gallons of crude oil during another real-world test. One can notice nylon nets packed with hair extending for dozens of meters across the ocean surface, functioning as living barriers that purify the water through simple contact. This represents an organic technology that is essentially free and accessible anywhere populations exist. It seems simple to deploy such a resource in an emergency. The process is only gaining momentum as more hair is collected from salons globally. At first glance, this solution appeared to be a perfect ecological tool, but in reality, hair possesses a significant technical flaw. The material takes an extremely long time to decompose in the natural environment once it is discarded. Everything only gets more complicated when considering the chemical profile of modern hair. Strands are often saturated with synthetic dyes and salon-grade chemical products. These substances could potentially leach out and further contaminate a fragile ecosystem already struggling with an oil spill. The equipment requires a material that is even purer and more abundant. Humanity required a resource that was entirely natural and available in even greater quantities, without the risk of chemical additives. Nature had already engineered such a material, which was found piled in massive quantities alongside existing agricultural waste. This transition to the next level of filtration was necessary to ensure the safety of the water. The material is ready to move to the next processing phase without haste. 370,000 gallons of industrial fuel spilled into the ocean when a vessel capsized off the coast of Bataan in 2023. Why did this catastrophe not trigger the same panic for hair donations seen 17 years prior during the previous environmental nightmare? The Philippine Coast Guard bypassed makeshift solutions and headed directly for local farms to mobilize thousands of sacks of dried coconut husks. This was a calculated deployment of a natural material known as coir. For decades, the global industrial sector disregarded this substance as mere refuse. Indonesia, India, and the Philippines generate massive quantities of coconuts, yet the focus remains strictly on the water, the meat, and the timber. The husk represents 35% of the total weight of the fruit, and between 85 and 90% of the world's coconut fiber was traditionally discarded or incinerated as useless waste. This was an immense oversight in resource management. One can notice how the perception of this material shifted only when its physical properties were re-examined through the lens of history and modern physics. Military forces during the Second World War referred to this material as the golden fiber. They utilized coir for the manufacturing of life jackets and camouflage netting because they observed that the fiber remains immune to rot even when submerged in salt water for extended periods. But this is just the beginning. Modern laboratory analysis has revealed the chemical reason behind this durability. 45% of the fiber structure consists of lignin, a natural polymer that functions as a powerful magnet for hydrocarbons. This represents the highest concentration of lignin found in any plant species on the planet. The microscopic architecture of the fiber is permeated with microcapillaries that act like millions of invisible suction tubes. It only looks obvious to compare it to other organic materials, but in reality, the performance gap is vast. Thailand conducted empirical tests proving that coconut fiber absorbs 30 times more oil than standard straw. Further research in Malaysia demonstrated that the fibers can retain oil for 72 hours without a single drop escaping back into the surrounding environment. The process is only gaining momentum as a primary response tool. One can notice how the fiber acts instantly upon contact with a spill. Once the saturation point is reached, the nets are retrieved from the surface. The oil is then mechanically pressed out for recycling, allowing the same fibers to be deployed again in a continuous cycle. It does not end at this stage. When the fiber eventually degrades after multiple uses, it is repurposed as organic fertilizer or processed into biofuel. The economic impact is equally significant, as these natural barriers are 20 to 30 times less expensive than synthetic plastic booms. Furthermore, they eliminate the risk of introducing microplastics into the marine ecosystem. Transition to the next level. The market value of coconut fiber has tripled since these properties were verified. Dedicated manufacturing facilities are now emerging specifically to produce these biodegradable barriers. The United Nations has officially designated coconut fiber as the most effective biodegradable oil absorbent available to humanity. Everything only gets more complicated as artificial alternatives enter the fray. While farmers stabilize oceanic environments with natural husks, researchers in high-budget laboratories attempt to match nature's efficiency through engineering. Within the United States, the Argonne National Laboratory has invested millions of dollars and years of development into the creation of the oleosponge. This chemical masterpiece utilizes a complex process known as sequential infiltration synthesis to modify the base material. The metal-like precision of this synthetic sponge aims to compete with the natural capabilities of the coconut fiber. Molten materials and complex polymers are being tested to see if human ingenuity can finally surpass the mechanical efficiency of the golden fiber. This stage represents a high-technology pivot in the global strategy for environmental defense. 90 times its own weight, is the exact volume of oil a specialized sponge engineered with oil-attracting molecules can absorb from the water surface. This chemical structure allows the material to act as a selective vacuum for hydrocarbons. Why is such a sophisticated material not used globally for every spill? Manufacturing these sponges is a complex, high-cost process that makes mass production for immediate emergencies on remote islands nearly impossible. At first glance, nanotechnology offers a perfect solution, but in reality, the gap between the laboratory and the ocean remains wide. Engineers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology designed the Sea Swarm, a solar-powered robot utilizing a continuous nanofiber treadmill to skim oil from the waves. This machine was designed to operate autonomously for weeks without human intervention. But this is just the beginning of the technical hurdles. 10 years have passed since the project. Tens of thousands of people lose their livelihoods, and entire aquatic ecosystems perish when industrial pollution strikes. Why does human technology often fail to provide a solution during such catastrophic environmental collapses? The answer lies in the unexpected properties of organic materials that were once disregarded as waste. Coconut fibers, long considered mere refuse, have been transformed into a primary defensive shield against chemical spills. Even human hair, discarded daily in vast quantities, is now woven into specialized nets capable of filtering toxins and preserving marine life. At first glance, this appears to be a poetic irony in the history of industrial progress. It seems simple to assume that more complex machinery is the only answer to the damage caused by modernization. But in reality, when the Earth is wounded by industrial expansion, nature provides the specific biological tools required for restoration. One can notice how the future of the manufacturing sector is shifting away from the construction of ever larger mechanical processors. Instead, engineers are beginning to integrate the silent technical wisdom found in timber and organic structures. The process is only gaining momentum. True industrial power is increasingly defined by the ability to operate in synchronization with natural systems rather than in opposition to them. The Sahara Desert functions as a massive geological grinding machine that moves relentlessly toward the south. It devours fertile land at a steady, measurable pace that defies conventional containment. Billions of dollars spent on concrete barriers and advanced satellite monitoring systems have failed to halt the encroaching dunes. However, the nation of Chad has executed a final strategic gamble involving $7 million to deploy a biological agent into this environmental dead zone. Why would a creature that has been extinct in the wild for 30 years be transported via military aircraft to solve a problem that modern dams could not fix? It only looks obvious to rely on steel and stone, but in reality, a living organism possesses a unique mechanical interaction with the terrain. This single biological footprint initiates a sequence that can revive the planetary surface. To comprehend the technical scale of this mission, the magnitude of the environmental threat must be calculated in absolute terms. The territory of Chad is colossal, exceeding the combined landmass of the states of Texas and California. 60% of this entire nation has already been overtaken by the desert and is considered biologically dead. This vast area is now entirely covered by the scorching dunes of the Sahara, which remains the hottest location on the surface of the planet. Dust slowly settles over the landscape where the temperature rises relentlessly throughout the daylight hours. The heat reaches levels that compromise the structural integrity of standard equipment. Transition to the next level. In these extreme conditions, the movement of sand is not merely a weather event, but a physical displacement of millions of tons of matter. The material is ready for the next phase of this complex ecological reclamation project. 30% of the nation stands precariously on the edge of a geological abyss, where the landscape is rapidly disintegrating into sterile dust. Why does this vast territory face such imminent destruction? One can notice how the ground cracks underfoot like the parched scales of a dead fish, providing tangible physical evidence that every last drop of moisture has been drained from the earth. The sound of this disaster is entirely silent, yet the visual impact remains undeniable. Rios that once flowed with immense hydraulic force are now reduced to nothing more than static scars etched into the landscape. But this is just the beginning. The Lake Chad Basin, which previously served as a vital water source for millions of people, has undergone a drastic contraction. Since the decade of 1960, it has shrunk to only 1/10 of its original surface area. It only looks obvious that a system can be maintained, but in reality, this represents a total collapse of the environmental infrastructure. The process of intervention is only gaining momentum. Human engineers attempted every mechanical solution available, pumping water from deep subterranean aquifers and utilizing heavy machinery to plant seeds across the arid plains. They even constructed massive artificial barriers designed to withstand the kinetic energy of the desert winds. Each of these human projects ultimately failed when confronted by the raw physical force of nature. The Sahara Desert continued its southward expansion like a giant mechanical grinder. Everything only gets more complicated. In this landscape of scorched and devastated earth, technical experts realized that brute mechanical force was insufficient. They required a technology that possessed an inherent knowledge of the terrain, an autonomous unit capable of operating in conditions where steel structural integrity fails and internal combustion engines seize. Transition to the next level. The solution did not originate within a factory, but emerged through the long process of biological evolution. This is the Scimitar Oryx. To the untrained observer, it is merely an antelope with horns curved like the blades of ancient warriors. Under the scrutiny of engineering, however, it is revealed as a biological machine of high precision. Its body is covered in a silver-white coat that functions as a sophisticated thermal shield, reflecting intense solar radiation away from its vital internal organs. At first glance, survival in such heat seems impossible, but in reality, the animal utilizes a specialized internal thermal regulation system. It does not end at this stage. Most mammals would experience systemic collapse while attempting to cool themselves in such an environment. The oryx, however, does not perspire even when the ambient temperature reaches 46 degrees Celsius. Instead of losing precious liquid through evaporation, it simply allows its internal body temperature to rise, operating at heat levels that would be fatal to other organisms. This allows for the conservation of every single milliliter of fluid. The animal requires no infrastructure or paved roads to navigate the dunes. Its wide hooves act as specialized excavation tools, and its nose functions like a high-sensitivity sensor. It is visible how the animal scans deep beneath the sand for roots and tubers, which serve as the only sources of water where no other life form can survive. Nevertheless, this biological marvel was effectively deactivated by human intervention. Driven by a demand for their horns and meat, and displaced by the expansion of industrial agriculture, the animals were hunted until they vanished. The biological production chain was broken, leaving the arid plains without their most efficient controllers. Thus, the most resilient technology of the desert reached the point of total extinction. One of the most critical biological systems of the region concludes its function here. 120 oryx provided the genetic foundation for a process that began when nature officially declared the species extinct in the wild. Why was the disappearance of a single animal so catastrophic for the entire Sahara? At first glance, it seems impossible that a herbivore could hold back a desert, but without their presence, the biological shield of the region collapsed entirely. Without the mechanical action of their hooves to till the earth, the soil sealed shut like concrete. The native grasses perished, and the shifting sands reclaimed the landscape. To reverse this environmental apocalypse, it was necessary to restart a lost biological technology. The rebirth of the species did not begin in the searing heat of the desert, but in the absolute stillness of the ice. Scientists initiated the rescue operation within the high-technology laboratories of the Smithsonian Institute in the United States, where the environment is strictly maintained at negative 196 degrees Celsius. It was there, submerged in deep tanks of liquid nitrogen, that the genetic code of the species remained preserved for years. The process is only gaining momentum. Researchers developed a revolutionary technique for artificial insemination that required no anesthesia. This was an absolute engineering necessity. Anesthetizing a 200-kilogram animal under intense stress could trigger a fatal thermal shock, destroying the investment. With the implementation of this new technology, the success rate for reproduction surged to more than 70%. The biological material traveled thousands of miles from the United States, France, and Abu Dhabi to reach the heart of the African continent. This complex maneuver allowed for the restoration of genetic diversity to over 90% of the original population. One can notice how the logistics resembled a military operation, with live cargo flying in massive transport planes to deliver biology back to its ancestral battlefield. Modern science became the key to unlocking the past, reducing transport costs by 80% through this specific biotechnology. The site selected for the landing was the Wadi Rimodi Akim Reserve. It is visible how colossal this area is, spanning 77,000 square kilometers, a territory larger than the entire nation of Ireland. $7 million were invested in the primary phase to construct support stations, satellite monitoring centers, and specialized adaptation fields. In March of 2016, the first 21 Oryx touched down on Chadian soil. Each individual animal functioned as a piece of high-value equipment, fitted with a high-technology global positioning collar valued at more than $2,000. These devices utilize the Iridium satellite network to transmit precise location, heart rate, and internal temperature data. But the desert is a furnace that does not forgive a single error in calculation. Initial euphoria following the birth of the first calf 6 months later quickly shifted into a state of red alert. Within just a few months, 1/3 of the animals had perished in the harsh environment. The heat of the Sahara is impiedoso. During the peak of the day, ground temperatures rise so high that they actually burned out the electronic components within the tracking collars. The wind blew at 49 degrees Celsius, turning the air into a wall of heat. It gets more complex further on. At night, predators like jackals dragged away the weakened calves, leaving nothing behind but the flashing signal of a global positioning system under the stars. The mission stood on the brink of total failure, but the technical team did not retreat from the challenge. They drilled artificial wells dozens of meters deep to bring water to the parched surface. They shifted the operational zone further south, where vegetation still resisted the sand, and trained the animals to become nocturnal to avoid the lethal sun. The survival rate climbed from 65% to 90% as a result of these adjustments. Then, the biological system began to function as an engine of terraforming. What no human machine could achieve on such a massive scale, the Oryx accomplished simply by existing. It all starts with the physics of a hoof. When an Oryx weighing hundreds of kilograms lies down to rest in 49-degree heat, its body weight creates small depressions in the sand. At first glance, these microbasins seem irrelevant. However, when the rare rains finally arrive, these pits hold every precious drop, preventing the water from evaporating off the hard surface or running away. These tiny wells become microscopic oases for life. The simple physical act of walking with wide, specialized hooves breaks the hard crust of the dry earth. This allows the soil to breathe, enabling air to penetrate the subsurface and moisture to reach the seeds buried below. One can notice how the landscape begins to change as the earth absorbs what it once rejected. The material transition continues as the ecosystem slowly stabilizes itself under the influence of the herd. This concludes the primary stage of the environmental restoration.